Hi guys, Josh here, aka Beards and Books. Today I'm going to be doing my top 5 reads of 2018 so far. Hope you enjoy. So as I mentioned guys, this is going to be my top 5 reads of 2018 so far. You might have seen me talk about some of these books already, especially in the mid-year free cut tag, which I put up not too long ago. I will leave a link for it in one of these fabulous corners, just in case you haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to go over my top 5 books. I'm not going to do best 5 and worst 5. Luckily, so far in 2018, I haven't read 5 books that I would class as bad, in all honesty. I haven't really read any that I've disliked. I've been quite selective with my reading, knowing that I've been purposely reading for videos and just books I've wanted to catch up on. So luckily, fingers crossed, it'll carry on that way. It's been a good year so far. I'm not going to do these in any particular order. There's one book that I'm going to mention that's been my favourite book of 2018 so far, but other than that, I'm not going to put the rest in order. It'd be too difficult to do. If you saw my mid-year free cut tag, you'll have seen me talking about The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This is the book that I've so far rated as my best read of 2018. To Kill a Mockingbird came very close to knocking it off top spot, but I'd still say just because of the uniqueness of The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, this would be my favourite book so far. So as I mentioned in my freak out tag, I gave The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle a 9 out of 10. This was a brilliant, really original sort of murder mystery, but with a great sci-fi twist. I have touched on it a few times, so I won't go into too much detail, but if you haven't seen my freak out tag or you haven't come across 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle as of yet, the main story is we wake up with a character who has complete memory loss and he's challenged with solving the death of Evelyn Hardcastle within 8 days. Now the twist to it, and the sci-fi part of the murder mystery, is that in those 8 days, the character moves between bodies essentially. So he starts day 1 in, we'll call him character A because I don't want to spoil it for you, who is quite scared, not too sure what's going on, but then day 2 he starts in an older gentleman, we'll say. He's very smart, very cunning, able to see clues that maybe characters before couldn't, but from where he's an older character physically, he's not necessarily up to the same challenges as other characters. Now those characters I mentioned are just examples, they're not spoilers at all. The characters that you go through are completely different to the last, so I haven't spoiled anything, but 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton is my read of 2018 so far. Very original, very unique. I gave it a solid 9 out of 10. And just for a bit of love for the author, this is actually his debut novel. When you read it, if you read it, and I hope you do, you'll understand what I mean, but it's just so well written. A lot of the twists and a lot of the little... There are parts that don't make sense, but then a chapter down the line they make complete sense, and it's so well written, but it all makes sense. There's none... Or at least there's no parts for me where I read it and I thought, he snuck that in. It all made complete sense. I'd highly recommend it. My book of 2018 so far. Pick it up. As I mentioned, there was one book that gave The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle a real run for its money, and that was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I'm probably going to do a full review on To Kill a Mockingbird shortly, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but for those of you that don't know the story, and I'd be very surprised if there's none of you that don't, so To Kill a Mockingbird originally came out in 1960s. It's based in the 1930s in a fictional town in the deep south of America. Now this is at a time where racial prejudice, slavery, segregation is all at its peak, and we follow a white lawyer named Atticus Finch who has to defend a black man in a court of law, which is quite unheard of at the time. Now the character Atticus that we follow is morally very strong. He's a very proud man. He's a man that believes in equality. He believes that people have the right for a strong defence in trial, so hence why he agrees to represent Tom Robinson, who is the character that he has to defend. Regarding the main story, we see it through the eyes of Atticus's daughter, who's called Jean Finch, or Scout is her nickname as she's known in the book, and that adds a really quality touch. I feel you really sense the proudness and the love that the family have for Atticus for putting himself at risk to defend Tom Robinson. The only downside, and it is a very, very small downside, is that the character Jean that we see the book through starts off as a 6-year-old, so you do also live through the slight tantrums and the squabbles in school, which is a very, very small negative. But there was a couple of points where I was thinking, come on, let's get through it. Essentially, I want to get to the interesting parts. I'd say the first half of the story, not too much happens, but I say that in such a good way because it was so well written, and the emotional maturity and level of the first half of the book was brilliant. I've never read a book that has got me quite as emotional as To Kill a Mockingbird has, and on so many levels, it's a real roller coaster. As I mentioned, I will put a full review of this out shortly. I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10, the same as 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle has been my favourite book of the year so far, mainly because of its just pure originality. But To Kill a Mockingbird is probably the best classic I use in light terms, that I've ever read. It's a brilliant book. It's only short, so if you haven't read it already, please do. One thing I wanted to make sure I did in this video was only include one book from a series. Now, I reread Harry Potter every year. I haven't done it yet, so I'm not including any Harry Potter in this. Any of you that have watched my videos, especially my BookTube newbie tag, will know that I'm a massive Game of Thrones fan. I am still reading Game of Thrones, so I had to get one of the books in there, and I've gone for what is considered an outside bet. I've gone for book number 5, A Feast for Crows. Now, the reason I say this is an outside bet is because for a lot of people, this is actually their least favourite of the Game of Thrones series. So, history to A Feast for Crows. George R. R. Martin was writing A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons essentially in one book. He'd originally planned for it to be one book, but the story was getting so large, there's so many characters that intertwine with each other, he made the decision to cut it in half. And rather than cutting it in half straight through page count, he cut it in half through characters. So in A Feast for Crows, we follow the smaller characters, the side characters essentially. There's no Jon Snow, no Daenerys, no Tyrion, no one of that note. But it worked so well. Because you spend so much time with these smaller characters, they become just as important and just as relevant to the story as the main characters do, which is why I personally really enjoyed this one. I went into it not expecting a lot. I absolutely loved it. I've raved about Game of Thrones in pretty much every video I've done, so you're probably getting bored of it now. So I'll end that one there. I mean, I always give Game of Thrones a 10 out of 10, but I don't include it in my books of the year or top book of the year because it would get boring. Game of Thrones would always win for me, but absolutely brilliant. Any fantasy fans out there, if you haven't tried Game of Thrones, I don't know what you're doing. I've had a lot of people say that they're quite intimidated with the books because of the size of them, and I do 100% get it, and they can be slow in parts, but when the story really gets going and you start to see all the stories intertwine, that to me they're perfect books. Make sure you read them. Now, the next 2 books I'm going to talk about really took me by surprise, to be fair. They're both books I'd heard of by authors I'd heard of. I picked them up kind of on a whim, essentially thinking I'd try something different. The first one of those is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Now, if any of you haven't heard of Blake Crouch, you'll have most likely heard of his Wayward Pines series, which is the series that he's most famous for, at least that I know of. I watched the TV series for Wayward Pines. The first series blew my mind. I didn't try the second series because it got really rubbish. I'm definitely going to pick up the Wayward Pines books, but I thought, I'll try a random one by Blake Crouch just to see what his writing style is like, and this blew my mind. So, Dark Matter is a sci-fi thriller, is the best way to describe it. It is mainly a thriller, but it's got a lot of sci-fi undertones, and the main plot twists and the way the story takes you is all based around science, time travel, travelling through alternate dimensions, multiverse theories, that sort of stuff. So although it is a thriller, it's very scientifically based. I'll talk a little bit more about the book. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to give away any spoilers, so I'll just kind of essentially read from the synopsis on the back. So we follow Jason, who in his youth was really high level in the scientific field, as I mentioned, looking into multiverses, time travel, those sorts of elements. Very early on in the book, Jason gets kidnapped, essentially. He wakes up in what appears to just be a different building, but he wakes up around people that know him, but he doesn't know them. So we then go through this whole experience of Jason trying to find out what's happened, who kidnapped him, where is he, and it's brilliant. Like I've not read a lot of thrillers, granted, so I might be the odd one out here, but Dark Matter was brilliant. For anyone that likes science and scientific novels, and then anyone that likes thriller novels, this is perfectly in the middle. I give this a solid 8 out of 10. There's no real negatives for it. I probably would have just liked more, if anything. I'd liked it to have been a bit more fleshed out, a bit longer. It had such an interesting storyline. The ending was brilliant, by the way. I really enjoyed the ending. And there's so many parts where something happens early on in the book. It makes no sense, and it's kind of brushed off. But then 10 chapters later, something else happens. It's brought to your attention again, and it makes complete sense. It's very well. Anyone that's watched Wayward Pines and knows the twists that come with Wayward Pines will know what to expect. It is very much in a similar vein. Definitely going to pick up more with Blake Crouch. 100% recommend you do. As mentioned, solid 8 stars. So the last book I want to talk to you about is The Girl with the Gifts. The lighting's a bit funny, so there you go, front cover. The Girl with all the Gifts. So The Girl with all the Gifts is written by M.R. Carey, and I loved it. So this is kind of a really weird mix of multiple storylines, I suppose. So it's a dystopian novel. It's set when a form of zombies have taken over the world and destroyed the world as we know it, essentially. It's very character driven. It's very much a thriller in the sense of the way the story plays out. It really ticks a lot of boxes, and I'm sure it will for a lot of you as well. So we follow the main character, Melanie, who is a young teenager who has the zombie virus. But from where she was born with it, she's able to control it to a level. So she's essentially a teenage zombie, but with the teenage girl mind. It was so original, so unique. The characters are just done brilliantly. Although it's a thriller, it's kind of a horror, it's kind of dystopian. The character building and the attention to detail on the characters really sets the story apart for me. I can't go into too much detail without spoiling it, which you know I'm not going to do. I'm sure a lot of you will have seen the film, or at least heard of the film. I'm going to hold it that way so you see it a bit better. Will have at least heard of the film. The film was actually relatively popular. I personally quite enjoyed it, but the book just expanded on the film a whole lot more. Definitely recommend you pick it up. There's also another book set in the same world, but not with the same characters. I think it's called The Boy on the Bridge, which is one I'm going to read at some point as well. So if you enjoy the world, like me, make sure to pick up The Boy on the Bridge as well. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of it, okay? Guys, thank you for watching. So as I mentioned, that is my top 5 books of 2018 so far. I'm not going to do a follow-up video on this and do my worst 5. As I mentioned, luckily, so far in 2018, I've been very lucky with the books that I've read. So I haven't got 5 to talk to you about, which is great, to be fair. So I hope you've enjoyed these. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these, or if you know of any similar books that you'd recommend that I maybe pick up for the second half of 2018. And let me know, what are your top 5 books? Booktubers, I'll look out. But anyone that just wants to comment, let me know. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.